fans, and welcome back to the Demonland podcast. My name is Andy, and after 156 days from our unceremonious dumping out of the finals in straight sets for the second year in a row, the Demons blew a 5-goal lead to concede 10 straight goals, eventually losing to the Tigers in our first practice match by 23 points and putting a massive dent in our chances to claim the AFL Community Series Cup. Joining me tonight is veteran Demonland track watcher and long-time Demonland contributor, George. Good evening, George.
Good evening, Andy. Good evening to the Demonlanders. Good evening to Ben Man. Isn't it great to be back to the real thing? Glad to be finished with all those silly sports like tennis and T20, so we can get back into the football that we all love so much. Now, for the listeners tonight, just a warning, we have been known to talk for about 3 hours about a game that only goes for 100 minutes. So let's see how we go tonight with a commentary about a 7-quarter match that took nearly 4 hours to play out. So get your pillows out, you might be here all night.
Yeah, 7 periods, George.
Yeah. I forgot about the 7 quarters. Yeah, this could be a long one, but I'm sure we won't spend too much time on the second game, just focusing on a couple of players that played. Also joining us tonight, you heard him already, is Demonland's resident statistician and president of the Nibbler Fan Club, B-Man. Good evening, B-Man.
Good evening, Andy. Good evening, George. And a scratch match, it's appropriate because I've got the tail end of a cold, so I'm feeling a bit scratchy. And so I certainly won't be talking for as long as that game 7 periods went for. And just a point of pedantry there is that this doesn't count towards the Community Cup flag, does it? Like it's a one-off thing, the Community Cup. Or what's the next game called? Is that a...
That's actually
or is this a simulation?
This was a simulation. Next week's a practice match.
Right. So was this AI generated, the game on the weekend?
I really hope so. And remember, it's only a practice match if you lose. If you win, you're premiership favourites. So, yeah, just a practice match. Just keep that in mind. Each week, I do ask our loyal listeners help us out by leaving us a 5-star review and a comment on Apple Podcasts. We love the feedback, and we do read it out on the show. Giving us a 5 stars helps boost the podcast, and it gets more people listening to the show, and that in turn can bring more people over to our website, demonland.com. Therefore, we've got more contributions from more voices to this show from our audience. So the best way you can help out the podcast is by boosting us in the form of those reviews or by helping spread the word to your Demon family and friends. It's been a long off season, but we did receive one review during that time. Cos GTV writes, "My Demons Bible, easily the most detailed and honest insight into all things Demons, referencing all the up-to-date stats that matter and canvassing extensive player and team issues across AFL, VFL and AFLW. It has everything you need to scratch that Demons itch and then some." Well, thank you, Cos, for that review, and I'd go see a doctor about that Demon's itch. Could be contagious, and keep that feedback coming. Give us the 5 stars on Apple Podcasts, and don't forget to click the write a review link and write a review as well as give us the 5 stars, and we will read it out on the show. On social media, you can follow us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and Threads. I don't really post in Threads much, but if you want to leave us feedback there or post a comment or a question for the show, you can post under our podcast post each week or just slide into our DMs. We won't read out your name, your full name on the show. In addition to being available on Apple, Google, Spotify, SoundCloud, and all your preferred podcasting apps, you can watch and listen to us on YouTube. Just search for Demonland Podcast to find our channel. And as always, if you want to chat with other Demon fans and you've never been to our forum, head on over to demonland.com, sign up, and you can chat with other D's fans from across Australia and around the world. It's completely free. And then you can, post questions and comments for our show, and you can also talk about your favourite footy club all day long as we do. In the off-season, I was privileged enough to interview Melbourne Football Club's recruitment manager, Jason Taylor, and he gave us some great insights into our new recruits as well as many of our recent recruits over the past few seasons. And I was also lucky enough to interview one of those new recruits in Colton Tolstrup. You can check out those 2 interviews as well as all of our other interviews wherever you're listening to this podcast now. If you're listening live, you want to join us on the air tonight to talk about any of the topics that we're going to talk about, give us a call on 03 9016 3666. That's 03 9016 3666. I'll answer. I'll put you on mute and bring you on when there's a break in the conversation. You can leave a message for us using that number during the week, and we'll play it on the show. Now, I just opened up Skype just before the show, and I realised we had a message from our mate Terence in Brussels, and I didn't get a chance to have a listen and break it down for the show. So, Terence, we might play that next week, but I apologise there. During the season, we're live every Monday, so if you want to listen to the show live, head on over to demonland.com on Monday nights at 8:30. Over the next few weeks, we might have a different live or release day schedule as we're going to play. I think we're playing on Wednesday night next week, and then before the season, we'll do a more comprehensive season preview show. So check out demonland.com to find out when we are playing. Let's get into a match overview just briefly. In a 7-period, that's periods, not quarters, practice match at Casey Fields, the Demons and Tigers took to the field in preparation for the upcoming home and away season. The match comprised an initial 4-quarter game featuring the best available 23 players, followed by 3 additional periods featuring the remaining available AFL-listed players, topped up with some VFL players. D's live wire Kasai Picker made a significant impact with 5 centre clearances from his 8 centre bounce attendances, as well as 2 goals during the match. Despite the D's defensive strength, highlighted by the presence of Stephen May, Jake Lever and Adam Tomlinson, their defence struggled against Richmond, conceding 18 majors after 4 quarters, including a stretch of 10 unanswered goals. Attempts to transition the ball quickly out of defence using the corridor continually came unstuck due to some poor execution, and subsequently the D's were burnt on the resulting turnovers, with their attacking play leaving loose men and gaping holes in defence. The D's ruck depth, or lack thereof, was highlighted with Max Gawn playing only the first half, and then 19-year-old rookie Will Varell stepping in with the occasional cameo from Josh Shackey. A couple of Demon debutants in Caleb Windsor and Kynan Brown showed some promise, with the latter snagging 2 goals. Norm Smith medalist Christian Petrarca only played less than 50% of game time in the middle, but bobbed up occasionally for some exceptional cameos, finishing the day with 25 disposals, 4 marks, 2 clearances and 2 goals. Partner in crime, Jack Viney was outstanding, particularly early in the match, and he ended the day with an exceptional 35 disposals, 6 clearances, 3 marks and 3 tackles. Both teams were without key players due to injuries and management, with Richmond missing several key players, including Brownlow medalist and 3-time Norm Smith medalist Dustin Martin, forward Tom Lynch, defender Dylan Grimes, and midfielders Dion Prestia and Tim Taranto. While Melbourne were without the likes of 4-time Bluey winner Clayton Oliver and Christian Salem in the first part of the match, as well as Angus Brayshaw illness, Harrison Petty toe, Tom McDonald calf, Ben Brown knee, Charlie Spargo Achilles, as well as wingman Lockie Hunter calf, and new recruits Shane McAdam calf and Tom Fullerton hamstring. And in a welcome return, Clayton Oliver's successful participation in the final 3 periods of the reserves part of the match simulation indicated his readiness for the upcoming season. He had 18 disposals, 13 contested at 94% disposal efficiency, 5 clearances and a goal, and that was from 3 quarters, remember that. Christian Salem also featured in the final 3 periods, overcoming recent back issues and accumulating 22 disposals, 8 tackles and 3 clearances. And while there were some worrying signs on display from those of us suffering from a bad case of MFC SS, we must remember that this was just a practice match, as I'm pretty sure my co-host will no doubt be very quick to point out. So, gentlemen, some brief takeaways from the match, and I'll start with you, George, because you were also in attendance at Casey Fields on Sunday.
Thanks, Andy. Firstly, I think for all the Demon Landers, and especially Andy with his MFC SS, this was not a practice match. This was not a practice match. This was a scratch match where you didn't even have 2 teams out on the side. You had 36 players playing almost a man-on-man type of game. If this was a practice match, you would have seen things like team defence, you would have seen zones, you would have seen movements by the coaches to stop things like that 10-goal run. This was all about, for both coaches, about seeing how individual players played in individual positions which weren't their normal ones. Now, in a lot of cases, that was because it was being forced upon us by injuries. We're missing Ben Brown up forward. We're missing Petty up forward. Oliver was a question mark. We're missing Melcham. Fullerton is injured. We're missing Spargo. We're missing Hunter. We've got to find people to fill the roles. From Uze's perspective, he was in the same boat. He's got Nankervis sitting out. He's got Prestia sitting out. So he had to find roles for people in the ruck and in the midfield. So what did we see? We saw Bolton go into the midfield. We saw Naismith, and we saw Sampson being tried out in the ruck. All around the ground, and particularly from our perspective, there were people playing out of their normal roles. We had Keziah Pickett being played in the middle. Let's see how he goes. We had Neil Bullen being played in the middle. Let's see how he goes. Kynan Brown was being used up forward. Why is that? Because Pickett's missing the first game. We've got to find someone to fill the role. Caleb Windsor on the wing, the same story. Hunter's more likely not to play in the first round. We need to try the kid. Let's see how he goes. Tomlinson is the third defender. Is T-Mac going to be available or not? That's what we've got to find out. Billings for the half forward. Verrill in the ruck because Fullerton's not available. Who's the next best option? Shackey? Well, they tried Shackey as well. All of a sudden, Verrill suddenly got more centre bounce attendances than what Shackey did. Max only played half a game. If we were serious about this being a practice match, Max would have played most of the game. Same with Petrarca. Played most of the first quarter in particular in the midfield. Second quarter, he basically sat down the forward line and then did a few cameos for the rest of the game. In the seconds, we had Salem being played in the middle. Why? To try him out again, because in the first we were trying other people in the middle. In the first we had Howes being tried out in defence. Why wouldn't you play Marty Hoare in defence as the trial? Because we know what Marty Hoare is going to provide for us in defence. We had to find out how Howes would go against seriously good AFL level players. There wasn't any zone defence. There was none whatsoever. If someone was running a 10-goal winning goal-kicking streak on you, you'd load up the defence with extra players. It just didn't happen. It wasn't stopped. It was because the coaches were looking to see how individual players would perform when they're playing up against decent AFL level competition. Next week, you're going to see two teams out on the field against Carlton. That's going to be a genuine practice match. This was all a bit of a hit and giggle, so don't take too much away from it, and don't get the razor blades out just yet.
Well, thanks for joining us on the Demon Land podcast next week.
Well, it's a semantic exercise to an extent, because one of the comments I made on Demonland I posted was it was very much the classic practice match. So it depends what you mean by practice matches. An opportunity to practice things, I thought. So leaving aside the terminology for how you describe the game, I don't think it was actually a match simulation would be my pedantry. So, my main takeaways were, I suspect they were in a heavy training phase at the moment, because they were cooked after the first 20 minutes. They looked like they were running on top of the ground in the first 20 minutes, and then they were cooked, and then they refreshed at halftime, and the first 15 minutes of the third they were up and about a bit more, and then cooked again. And one of the telltale signs of that is our kicking. I mean, as I've talked about a lot, our kicking is our Achilles heel. Pardon the mixed metaphors, but fatigue impacts kicking technique, and in that period we were woeful with our kicking. But even our best kicks were turning it over. Our average kicks, of course, we got heaps of them, but they were even worse. But I agree with George. It was very, very much a practice game for all the reasons George said. The result, I'm not bothered at all by the result. It was meaningless. There's some really good questions tonight, so that'll cover off most of my thoughts. But one of the bigger ones that we'll probably touch on a bit later. But there was a question from Stu, I think, My feeling is that in previous years, it's been this game that we've focused on and getting our match, our round one setups and structures in place, and less focus on the sort of, I don't know what you call a Community Cup, fully telecast, full bells and whistles game that'll be at Icon Park in a couple of weeks. And I think this year they've swapped that around a bit and might explore the reasons a bit more with some of the questions that relate to that. But yeah, I totally agree. I wouldn't take anything away from it in terms of where we're at, and certainly wouldn't be thinking, I'll know what's happening. We gave up 10 goals, or we're going to drop out of the top four, or, it's portent to something terrible this way comes. So, I thought there were some really interesting signs. One of, as George said, probably the biggest flag that this was a hit and giggle to sort of work some things out was, it was having gone off at halftime and Varel rucking for a full half. If this was a proper game where you're looking to, get your to reflect some, how it might look round one, well, Gorn's not coming off at halftime, and I'll bet London to a brick he's not coming off at halftime against the Blues unless there's an injury concern.
Are you sure that was the plan? Because he sort of hurt his hand just before half time.
Well, I'm not sure, but no, not sure. But as George said, there are all manner of other things like Shaki in the ruck. It was interesting because I wrote on Demonland earlier in the week that, I was curious after watching him at training. He's a big boy, he's not that much shorter than Max. Why, for his career, and given we need a second ruck and Fullerton's injured, why wouldn't you give Shaki a run in the ruck? My concern is he's not physical enough. So I was really pleased to see that they did give him a run. So, but you wouldn't be doing that if you were playing for Cattle stations, would you? So, there were a bunch of other things as well. So, even there, as George said, obviously their response to having goals kicked on them. We don't need to practice our zone defense. We need, the most noticeable one was these chains of handballs. Like, it made me, sent me back in memory to the early 2000s, mid 2000s of Melbourne fans screaming, "Kick it!" Just kick the ball when the standard footy was transitioned through lots of chains of handballs. We're not. That was clearly something that they were practicing and taking over from training, and it for me, it felt as much more like a training run than anything I've seen in these preseason games for 2 or 3 years. And again, there's some questions about sort of how we might be approaching this season in terms of getting through to the end of the season fit and firing. And I wonder whether, we're seeing a bit of that approach in this game is maybe not, maybe reflecting on the last 2 or 3 seasons, thinking maybe we've gone too hard too early.
All right,
and we're also in the position where we do have to fill holes. We've got to try these guys up forward. We've got to try a backup ruck. We need a winger at least in the first game. We need a small forward. So this was the opportunity. It's very different from where we've been before.
What the thing I would take away from it is it's a bit like in the classic practice match terminology is the A team. So obviously Salo and Oliver and they're in the A team. But I think it was an interesting sign of what they're thinking is that the Colt wasn't, for instance, and that Windsor clearly was. So, but we can draw some goody learnings from the last 2 or 3 years in this corresponding match where McVie played in this corresponding game last year. I think I'm right in saying, and so I think it definitely is an indicator on where they're thinking about some of these young players, and I wouldn't have had him in the frame before, but 100%, I know we've got questions on this, but 100% got Brown in the frame for round one now on the back of being selected and 2 not looking out of, looking like he absolutely can play at the level.
Yeah, and that's
shortly, George.
Yeah, that's absolutely right, because we're going to need Brown to fill that small forward role, and that's probably why Colt wasn't playing in the seniors, because we don't need Colt. We haven't got a lack of a player in his role or potential role in the team, but we do need a Caleb Windsor, because it's very likely that Hunter won't be available. So who's the notional winger? Let's see how he goes. And that's what they did.
And Howe's back as well.
Yeah, same thing. Yeah.
All right, let's get into stats files. B-Man, we had limited stats available for this match, so what insights can you provide us maybe from a statistical perspective, if you can?
So I gave Andy, for this year's stats file, I thought, rather than going through the stats, so I've talked about this before last season, that the sort of key stats that Melbourne, the club, look at in terms of indicators of how we're travelling that are critical, and they're the ones I've focused on when I've looked at stats each week. Stoppage clearance is the sort of a standard thing across the AFL, but they're actually not such a big one for us. But the ones for us are definitely pressure, both individually and team pressure. Time in forward half is a really big one. Stats that indicate how well we're transitioning from the back half. It was interesting in the call, one of the callers mentioned that in footy now, 70% of all scores come from turnovers. So for all teams, turnover and scores from turnover is a critical number, and it was in the finals for us last year in a negative way. And obviously things like marks inside 50. So metres gained is another one that's a critical D stat. Inside 50s as a measure of forward half dominance is a big one for the Ds as well, and time in forward half. So they're the ones that I've been focusing on for the last couple of years in terms of the stats file. But this year, rather than going through them each week, I thought that I might change the structure a little bit and still focus on those stats, but under the sort of categories of the good, the bad, and then the curious. And actually, I asked Andy to organise a stinger for me, but he's with a song for that. But he went all copyright on me, and said, and I did a bit of googling, Andy, and you are right. Even a 5-second bit of a song cannot be used on a podcast without copyright. So I'm going to reach out to that act, which is an Italian dub act, and get approval to play it on the show as a stinger, as an entry for this segment. So I'm not sure where you got the stats that you were reading about that the last three periods. Where'd you see them? I didn't see any stats other than the CBA ones that you.
One I got one of them. There's an Instagram page, AFL Central, and they had some of the stats from some of the players, but not for everyone. So I think everyone that I mentioned is players that I had stats for.
Right. Well, I'll touch on those CBAs in a sec, 'cause I thought they were interesting. But in terms of good numbers, I thought there were some really positive signs in terms of our kicks inside 50. In particular, I watched the goals before that are up on the website, all the goals, or at least for the first four quarters, four periods, and Viney's kicking was excellent. His kicks inside 50 were the best I've seen, and I reckon it's really worth noting about Viney is that last season was the first pre-season he's been able to train in footy boots pretty much for his entire career. It was his first season where he had an uninterrupted, no post-season surgery, was able to be in footy boots right from the get-go, and his kicking improved out of sight last season. Really, we talked about it a fair bit on the podcast, and it appears just on the back of that one game is that it's gone up a level again, which for a player who's critical for us in terms of the amount of balls he gets, and he gets those dangerous balls in centre clearances often, that's going to be a big factor. If he can improve just a little bit his inside 50 kicks, that's going to be a big factor for us. So that's definitely a positive for me. On the highlights, there's extended highlights. They teased it on I saw it on Demonland. Well, 59 seconds is not that extended, I have to say, but in that package he went 100% disposal efficiency by foot in the 59 seconds, didn't miss any. But
the ones that he didn't hit it.
Yeah, that was the gag. But I thought his kicking was excellent, and there was some other really good kicks inside 50 in that first 10 to 15 minutes when we kicked those 5 unanswered goals. He kicked a beautiful lead pass to a leading to a leading JVR, and JVR also had another one from the centre bounce. I think it was track. It might have even been Viney again, actually, who on the sort of lead coming straight out from goals took a beautiful mark. So that's definitely a good stat. As I noted before, scores from turnovers is a critical number in footy these days, arguably the most critical number. You can see who wins games of footy just by that number. Every time we lost that number, I'm right in saying that, I think we lost every time bar one or two last seasons when we lost that scores from turnover. And that included the game against Carlton in home and away, and the two finals that we played. They were critical numbers. And so the bad was our turnovers in that period outside the first 20 minutes of the game. We turned it over, some horrible kicking. As I said, I suspect partly this is informed by excellent Track Watchers reports, some really fantastic, including George's and your comments, Andy, and Kev Martin, and a whole bunch of others, picket fence, talking about our training. And there's been, I think, the second to last session, we looked a bit fatigued. There was commentary about that. And I think that it wouldn't surprise me if we're in a sort of quite a heavy phase, and it looked like that, just in terms of how our skills dropped away. May just, I think I put him in the bad. He just should be directed not to kick the ball any less than 60 metres, because, and this is not a stat, but on a bad thing, I would say I think May's got to continually work on his body language. He missed Bowser with a kick over his head from 30 metres. It was an appalling kick, and he seemed to give it to Bowser afterwards. And that's just, for me, not on. You wear it. You make the mistake, you wear it. Cost us a goal. So that's definitely a bad. And then, the curious one was the centre bounce attendances and the ruck stats that you put up, Andy. We obviously had a mix of players in the centre bouncer attendances. So the main one was that I thought was interesting was Nibbler had a fair bit of time inside, didn't have any clearances. The other one was, of course, in the other period, was the amount of time that Salo had. I mean, George, he was pretty much in there the whole time, wasn't he?
Yeah, he had his own ball in that game, and it was interesting that they put him in the middle in the seconds compared to the first. But I suspect it's because they wanted to try other people in the first, and it was an opportunity to try Salem in an area as well that he's never really played in.
Yeah, no, just a question to both of you. Have you ever seen, I was trying to think if there's an example of this, of players rolling through the midfield from the halfback flank. It almost seems to be, I couldn't think of an example. It seems to me that it's always the half forward flank that they provide the chop out, but you don't see it very often where the halfback flanker comes into the middle. So
it's always been the half forward. The rotations has always gone through the half forward line.
Yeah, which makes me wonder whether they will run Solo through the centre, because it would, if that remains the case, that means you take him out of the back half. So that, and maybe that might be something that they might look at in the early part of the season. In terms of the rucking, Maxi had 44% of the time in the 2 quarters he played. Shaki, I can't recall whether he had that many in the, he played all 4. He had 17%. I thought it was 17% across those 4, but my sense was, George, maybe you can remember, what I thought most of that was in the first half.
Yeah.
Varel, he had 13 centre bounce attendances, 38% of the time. And then the midfielders was interesting mix. This is, I thought, was quite remarkable, and definitely I would categorise it in the curious, given it was a practice game. Is Viney had just shy of 80% of the centre bounce attendances. He went to 27 of them. By way of comparison, Track only went to 16, 47.1%. Track Viney had a game, well, certainly a Melbourne high. No, actually a game high from the numbers I'm looking at here that you posted, Andy. He was 6 clearances, so he was a beast, wasn't he? He was incredible. And if he can keep that level of kicking up, he suddenly becomes a weapon that, not the blunt weapon that he is at the moment. Nibbler had the next highest, 64%, and that was definitely interesting. And the one that really jumped out, and I'm sure we'll talk about it through, is when this was surprising just because of how terrific he looked. But Cozzy only went to 8 centre bounce attendances, or 8 centre bounces for 23.5. In that time, he kicked 5 clearances. I'm not sure what the 2 goals is. That mean 2 goals from the centre bounce, Andy? Do you know?
No, his 2 goals came from general play.
No. There's a table. I'm not sure whether he got that just meant that he got 2 goals, or that they weren't 2 goals generated from those clearances.
No. They were just
2 goals he kicked, right? So, well, because he had 5 clearances and made a pretty good.
From 8 centre bounce. Which is pretty good.
Yeah, and I mean, it was a bit like his ability to evade and how clean he was and how good he is at sort of moving laterally through traffic. He just looked natural in the middle. And one of the things just on Cozzy that I wanted to sort of also point out or discuss is last year we were talking at this time last year is he really bulked up last year. He looked bigger and through the chest last year. He looks like he's dropped a bit of that weight through his shoulders and looks in really good nick. So, a watch will be how much they play him this year. But based on that, geez, you'd love to see him, attend at least that many centre bounces through every match, because leaving anything else aside, he was just thrilling to watch. But he got the ball forward as well, and he uses it well. He's such a clever kick on both sides of his body. So, I thought that was interesting. I can't see, but I think Nibbler's really a natural midfielder. But I suspect if you looked at him, that they use him in a defensive role as well in the midfield, and to free Cozzy up. So I don't know how that looked, but I wouldn't be surprised if whenever Cozzy was in the centre, that Nibbler was also in the centre.
Is that it? That's it. Yep. Stats. All right. Well, let's get into the listener questions. We're starting on the debutants. The lefty writes, "Welcome back. It's been a long few months, but footy is back. Interested to get your thoughts on all the Demon debutants: Billings, Windsor, K. Brown, Varel, and even Howes and Laurie." So we'll go through these players one at a time. We'll start with Billings. Jabroni says, "Great to have you all back. Really missed the podcast over the summer. I like the look of Billings on the weekend. Do you see him as possibly part of the midfield rotation?" So, George, Billings had 21 disposals. He took 7 marks. He laid 2 tackles. He attended 2 centre bounces with no clearances. What are your thoughts on Billings? What is a good pickup? And where do you see his role in the team this season?
I don't know where his role's going to finish up. He is an extremely skilled player, particularly by foot, which will please Binman no end. There was one section of play I recall that resulted in a Fritsch goal. Billing kicked it just so beautifully accurately over the top of the defender's head to land perfectly in Fritsch's arms. And you go, there's someone who can really kick. He kicked it to the right position, but it was also the right length. He is a lovely kick of the ball. So where he plays, I don't know. I don't know that he's got the strength to play in the middle. You need a lot of grunt in the middle. So he's another one that I think they were playing him a bit off half forward, half back. I don't know that he's got the run to play in the wing, for example, but I think he'll be a half forward, half back option. And this was what this game's all about, just seeing how people go in something that's unusual to them. The sad part from Billings is that I think he's only played 3 games in the last 2 years, something ridiculously low because of injuries. So building his confidence up is going to be something that's important. But yeah, he's got. If he can get on the park, he's going to be a real positive for us in a big way.
And he's had a full pre-season.
Yeah.
That's a tick already, B-Man.
Yeah, I had a discussion on Deanland this afternoon with a couple of people around his role, and my sense is that one of the questions I put out there was what his fitness levels are like. Am I right to think that he's sort of been generally considered a pretty fit aerobically pretty good. And I put that out there. Jay Rogan replied that yes, he is regarded as pretty fit, but that the sort of question mark on the Saints was that was defensively not that great, and maybe hadn't done the hard stuff as well as he might. And Jay Rogan, right? That personally he'd give up the extra 4 pressure acts and 2 tackle a game as a second high half forward if he can hit McAdam or inside 50 once or twice a game. We kick 1 more goal per game last year. We have a percentage of 130 plus, and the number 1 offensive team. The margins are that slim. To which I replied that I totally agree. I think that if he has got the tank to play that high half forward role, we can well and truly cover any lack of defensive effort he has. We've got enough defensive warriors. So I suspect that he'll play that high half forward role. And I think that's exactly why we brought him in, because he can hit a target. And I think I talked about this last year a lot, but it's an underrated skill, the ability to weight a kick to a forward's advantage, particularly those key forwards like a JVR. And, as a generalisation, we're woeful at it. We've got so few players who can do that well, and I include Track and Oliver in that. And I think it really, it feeds the ball to the opponent's intercept marker, and it just makes it hard for our forwards to get clunk one-on-one marks. So he has got that skill. He's got that ability to sort of weight it off the side of his kick or make a late decision. So I very much see him in the mix for that high half forward role with a number of players. I think Nibbler's got one side locked up, and then there's a question about Laurie. He's in the mix for that role. Spargo's in the mix for that role. I think maybe the Colt later is in the mix for that role. I think Windsor's in the mix for that role, and Billings. And I think based on what I saw on Sunday, Billings has got the, there's probably 3 high half forward roles now. So there's one rolling off the interchange bench as a utility through there. So for me, Nibbler's definitely one, and I think Billings has got the other one locked up. And then it's, as I said, it's Laurie and perhaps Brown as well, although he might play closer to goal. But Brown, Laurie, and Windsor in the mix for the other high half forward role.
The other thing about Billings is he's got vision. He can see things that other players can't. We've got a few players with that capability, but he can see where the ball needs to go.
Yeah,
and is capable of delivering it. Petrarca is the contrary. He can see it. He just can't deliver it. He just can't deliver it. Yeah,
exactly.
But Billings is magnificent at this, and it's really difficult to judge Billings' fitness when he was at St Kilda because he was so injured. And I can see the arguments. Bit lazy playing out the back, no defensive side because. I'm pretty sure I'm right. 3 games in 2 years or something ridiculously low. You can't judge his, whether he was even 100% or even 50% fit during that period of time. But
and you need a balance in every footy team. And the Saints' problem at that stage, and probably until last year, was that they had too many of those sorts of players and not enough of the players who were, disciplined, play their roles. And we've got enough of them to carry a player who gets out the back. In fact, it's what we need a bit more of. So, to answer the question, will he play in the midfield? I don't think he'll go anywhere near the midfield, despite the fact he had, I think, 1 or 2 centre bounce attendances in this game.
Let's get on to the young boy Windsor. The calf injury to Lockie Hunter opened the door for the pick number 7 in the draft, Caleb Windsor, to show his wares. Windsor had 24 disposals, 17 kicks and took 3 marks. B-Man, there was some iffy execution at times, which belies what I've seen of his very clean and silky disposal at training. What were your impressions of Windsor in his first hit out against an AFL opposition, the bigger bodies? And do you expect that we will see him in the red and blue on opening round or at least early in the season?
Working backwards, yes, I do. I think he's a lock for round 1. I think that for that reason, I think really, there's a lot of talk about our game plan, which, this is going to be one of my hobby horses all season, which is, we've got a game plan that every team basically copied last year. I talked about that at the end of last season. So our game plan isn't going to change much, and that's going to, send people's to frustrate a lot of people. The difference is the teams who have adopted our game plan, and the Pies being one of them, certainly the Lions, and I think Port as well, and the Giants. Port haven't adopted it quite as in the same way the Giants have got better kicks than us, and so we have brought in players obviously specifically to address that. Billings is one, Windsor's another. There's just no question in my mind. So for that reason, he's in. As for how my thoughts on how he played, it's fair to say I wasn't blown away. I'm surprised he got as many kicks as you're saying he did, Andy. So what'd you say, 24 possessions?
Well, it's on this page. It is 24 disposals, 17 were kicks. He's taken 3 marks.
Right, well, he probably went no better than 50% disposal efficiency with those kicks, I suspect. Every time the commentator said he was a renowned kick as a junior, he coughed the ball up. And so, again, though, my feeling is that was a function of fatigue. So, that's how it looked. He's an excellent kick under little pressure, and he was making mistakes. So, to me, Brown looked more like, ready to play. But I think Windsor, if I had to guess, I'd say Windsor's will play round 1. Ironically, when he did hit a target inside 50, it was a shank that Cozzy marked about 20 metres out that set up a goal. But, he looks athletic. He looks like he's got a bit more work to do in terms of size, obviously. You guys have seen him more at training. Was that he's, from what I've read on Demonland, he's trained a lot better than he looked in this match.
He's the one observation from this game is he is frighteningly fast. There was one stage where a Richmond player was bouncing the ball going down the wing, and while Windsor didn't get to him, the closing speed was just incredible. He came from a long way back to nearly get to the player as he kicked, but he is very, very fast. And I wouldn't have thought he would have played round 1. However, in the absence of Hunter, I think he'll get the role, and that's why they tried him out in this game to see what he could do. Well, 24 possessions, and he's got a lot of work to do, particularly on the defensive side. Not surprisingly, he's only been at the club for 10 weeks or whatever. I think he'll fill the hole in the short term. Don't expect him to play for the whole season. He's only an 18-year-old kid at this stage, but a lot of upside there.
Well, if he's fast, then that gives me more confidence he'll play, because along with kicking, I think that's the other area we needed to improve in, which is pace. It's become so important because of the pressure that's applied in footy in the big games now, is that the ability to get a yard on your opponent, to be able to get space to balance up. That first 5 or 6 metres, pace over that first 5 or 6 metres is important, but also the ability to cover 30, 40, 50 metres at pace has become incredibly important. So, it was a surprise I've forgotten. We picked him at number 7, didn't we? So, Top 10, you're expecting a pretty good player.
Kynan Brown, son of ex-Demon Nathan Brown, put on the red and blue Guernsey for the first time, and many were impressed with the young lad playing in the forward line. He racked up 15 disposals and kicked 2 goals, one of them a beauty hard up on the boundary with his left foot. D. Old Fart asks, is Pup Brown a realistic small forward prospect for 2024? George, what do you think?
In the same way as Caleb Windsor is going to find a position because of Hunter's absence, Cozzy's absence in the first game is going to create the opportunity for that small forward. I didn't expect much from Brown. He's a rookie pick, but boy, he has a natural ability that was most unexpected. He also has this ability, as Cozzy does, to be able to dance through places that he should get absolutely flattened by. He just comes out the other side, and he's got an excellent kick on him as well. From the looks of things, that goal that he kicked was just magnificent. Just drilled it beautifully. He hasn't got the strength, obviously, at the moment, but I think we might see him again. I wouldn't have thought we'd see him at all in the first season, but in the absence of other people in the team, you're trying to fill holes, and he's the right sort of person to fill the hole.
Yes, certainly is. Will Varell, rookie ruckman, Will Varell relieved his captain Max Gawn after halftime, playing the final 2 quarters of the match, and then played 2 of the 3 periods in the VFL section of the match. The Herald Sun produced some centre bounce attendance stats, but they weren't clear if those stats related to the first 4 periods or all 7 periods. But since he was the only listed player to have played beyond the first 4, I believe the stats do only relate to the first 4 periods, so we'll present them that way. Bin Man mentioned it before. Will attended 13 of the second half centre bounce attendances. Max attended 15 in the first, and Shaki attended 6 over the 4 periods. We don't have any hit-out stats, and I don't have any disposal or mark stats for Will. Wells 11 asks, thoughts on Varell? Could he step up this year? Monocular writes, looking forward to listening again in 2024. Is Varell looking more than promising? B-Man, what are your impressions of what we saw of Varell on the weekend?
I was pleased, actually. I mean, he's the main thing for the young ruckman is have they got the size? And Farris White has worked super hard on his size. He's put on so much size, but he's still in the last 3 periods, you could still see he's a fair way off being sort of AFL ready size wise. But Varell, he looks thick through the shoulders. I saw him at the training up close. He's a big boy and he's played a lot of footy. I think he has a good chance to play early days. I'm not sure early on. It might depend on matchup. But while Fullerton's not in there, it's going to be a really interesting question because it's sort of partly will be, are they prepared to run Shaki in the ruck? If they're not, then Varell comes into the frame. I'm really hoping that they don't use JVR in the ruck. If certainly not as much as they did last year, but I would really love them to just leave him at home down forward and let him focus on his forward craft and not get smashed around so much, because for a young fella, he did an enormous amount of rucking last year. Yeah, I thought he improved his rucking out of sight. So, but particularly in the first half of the season, I'd really like them to look after JVR a bit and just let him run and jump at the ball as a forward, which I think brings Varell right into the frame. He's a big, solid unit. How old is he, Andy? He's only
19.
He was last year, so it'd be 19. He's
19.
190 centimetres in height, so he was sort of dwarfed by the Richmond rucks. What did you think of his leap? Will his leap sort of counteract that?
No. I mean, I think he's one wood as he goes forward as a footballer will be his strength. He's going to be a very strong ruckman, and he'll be that wrestling time. You don't need him as really as a big tall. We got Max, so he's only going to be playing with Max in the side. I really like the fact that he slotted the goal that he kicked. A really neat looking kicking action, and I was pleasantly surprised. And I mean, it's a big ask for a 19, 20-year-old to come in, but he certainly, I mean, the Fullerton's won't be there ready in the first few games. Look, I don't want to be negative about Shaki. I think it's great, but he's got a bit of work to do before, I think they'd be confident in him running in the ruck. But maybe if he plays, then I'd rather him be thrown into the ruck than JVR, to be honest. I don't know. What do you think, Andy? You reckon he'll get a gig early days?
It was sort of like, don't really have the cat. It all depends whether T-Mac's available. It depends how quickly Fullerton's back, which they think he's going to be back quicker than they initially thought, but still he's not going to be there round 1 or 2. It seems like Shaki will have to be, and we'll talk about Shaki later because we've got a question about him, but it seems like he'll have to be the partner in crime to JVR. So I don't think we'll play if Shaki is the second tall. I don't know whether Petty will be back in time. Then Shaki's likely to take the second ruck duties, for those 5 minutes at the end of quarters when Max has a rest. But
what Varell will be important is the role that Dorr played a couple of seasons ago at Casey is to be the player, work on his craft all year at Casey, take the heat off Farris White and allow him to, work on his craft, but be the main man in the ruck and structure up like we do in the ones, so that any players coming up from the ones, any mids coming up from the twos, to the ones are following the same system, same structure. So a better question is what's his potential rather than if he's going to play early days. Probably isn't going to play early days. That would be silly, I guess. But I thought he looked like he had a good potential as a ruck, and he's only going to get bigger. By the time he's 23, 24, he's going to be a very super strong ruckman type. So a bit like I've lost him now. What's the not as tall, but what's the Freo ruckman?
Yeah,
Darcy.
Darcy.
Darcy. Not like
Yeah,
Jack.
Darcy.
Well, Varel was a perfect example of what, George, you were talking about, that it's practice for positions, and this was Varel's chance to go out there and practice against.
And they gave him a good run at it, full half, and, notwithstanding your comment about Maxi's hand, my suspicion is that was the plan. Otherwise they would have... it's unlikely they would have run him. If that wasn't the plan, it's unlikely they would have run him for a whole half, because they're so specific about the numbers and the clicks they run and the loading and all of that stuff, is that they wouldn't randomly say, well, we're going to run him a unplanned full half of footy if they... I wouldn't have thought.
The other option is that because they only ran Shaki for two centre bounces, and Varel was 13, I think. I think in this game they actually worked out that Shaki is not the option in the middle, and they gave Varel much more opportunity to show his wares. I think the other positive for Varel is Varel can play forward. We tried to turn Grundy into a forward, but Varel, even in this game, showed that he can actually go forward, take a mark, and kick a goal. I think Shaki might be on very thin ice at the moment. Varel won't play the whole season by any stretch. You can't expect someone who's that young to do that sort of thing. But I think Varel was a bit of a surprise in this game, and he may be another surprise come the first game.
Let's move on to Howes. In the past 2 seasons, there's been big raps on Blake Howes from our Casey watchers, by all reports, and confirmed in my interview with Jason Taylor. He was on the cusp of senior selection late in both 2022 and 2023 before injury cut his season short. Many on Demonland who got their first glimpses of him in the match sim weren't overly impressed with his game on the weekend. Having said that, there were large chunks of the game when turnovers had our defenders under siege. I don't have any stats for Howes for the game. George, as someone who has seen what he can do at Casey, what were your impressions of Howes in this match?
I think this was just another trial just to see what the kid can do under AFL pressure. He got exposed by people like Bolton. How surprising. Most people get exposed by Bolton, especially...
one of the best players in the or up and coming.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. But there was here was the opportunity to put a young kid and put him on one of the best players, and certainly in the Richmond side, and let's see what you can do. He would have learned a lot from it. Like I said, they weren't playing his own defence, so it was just to see what he was capable of doing. It looks horrible when your opponent kicks goals on you like Bolton did, but it was just about getting experience into him. He's another one of those players who seems to read the ball really, really well, reads the play really well, and he finds himself in the right position. He's going to find it difficult to find a spot in the side when you've got the Mays and Levers and those sort of players ahead of him at the moment. But he'll get his chance at some stage. Injuries will occur. He just needs to develop a little bit more, needs to build a little bit more strength for a defensive role. But he's one for the future more than anything else. And it was just an opportunity to give him a chance. He, for example, I wouldn't expect to see him play in the Carlton game. He's had a chance to have a look at it. We don't need to see any more.
Where was he playing? Where did he play most of his footy last year at Casey, George?
He was injured for a good part of it. That was the part. But again, it was half back line.
Yeah.
Okay. High half back, or deep.
A bit like McVee's role.
Yep. So I wondered. My thought was whether they want to, if they can create an opportunity to get McVee further up the ground, and that would mean that a player like Howes would have to take the Bolton, which is, that's the type of player that McVee's got last season. So, and it's worth, I think, noting that McVee, I can't remember the Saints player he got, but last season he got, in these two games, he got really good players defensively and ended up playing. So I wouldn't discount Howes being in the frame either. And partly that it'll be really curious to see what they do with Sailor. I'm not convinced they'll end up running him as a mid, but maybe if they do, that frees up a spot down back.
And the other thing not to forget is Hibbert's not around anymore.
Yeah, that's a good point. And so he could pick up that role. And they kept, the thing was, as your point about it not being a practice match and mine being at a practice match, is that they kept him on Bolton. They didn't take him off Bolton. So if that's about the opportunity to learn from one of the best players in the AFL.
Just like they threw McVee on Dusty last year in corresponding. Well, it wasn't the corresponding because we played the practice match against Richmond. The match sim was against St Kilda last year. Laurie, last season, Bailey Laurie played 5 games for the D's, 3 as the sub and 1 game where he was subbed off. He averaged 7.2 disposals last year, 0.6 marks, 1.2 tackles, with his best outing against the Hawks in round 23 where he racked up 14 possessions. In this match, Laurie's had 22 disposals and 6 marks. He tended 2 centre bounces for 0 clearances. B-Man, your impressions on Laurie in this match, and do you see him getting more of a regular gig in the ones, and in what role? Keeping in mind that Spargo, Oliver, Salem and Brayshaw will be returning, probably forcing Nibbler out of the middle and back to a high half-forward role. So where does Laurie fit into this puzzle, if at all?
It's really curious. Maybe I've got a set against him because I'm amazed that he got 22 possessions, because if you'd asked me how many he got, I would have said 15 tops. So that surprises me, because I was going to say that he doesn't get enough of the pill. 22 possessions isn't bad. The jury's out for me with Laurie. We talked about it last year, but I was really surprised he was selected ahead of Spargs for that Pies game. And then I thought it was a really curious decision not to run him through the middle when Gus went down. I couldn't work that out. So essentially he came in to play the high half forward role in both the finals last year, and didn't really get any time on the middle, but was a mid at Casey last year. So, for me, the jury's out, and to be honest, the jury's out a little bit for me on Chandler. And so for me, I mentioned it before, but let's say there's 3 of those high half forward roles. I think Nibbler's got 1 lockdown, so there's 2 left. For me, fighting for those positions, potentially Windsor, though George is right, he could also be a winger, so he could be a threat to Hunter's position. But let's say Windsor, Spargo, Laurie, Billings, and Brown, though he could pay closer to goal, I think, 2, as I noted before, and maybe the Colt, all fighting for those 2 spots. So for mine, Laurie's in competition with Spargo, Billings, Brown, to maybe Colt when he comes on a bit, and Windsor. So he's probably direct. I think Billings will come in, so that's 1 less spot. So I think so that leaves 1 position to fill from that higher forward. And so I think we're back to where we were at the end of last season, which is Laurie directly competing with Spargo for a position. And it's interesting, I can't recall, maybe it was Chaplin in the interview afterwards. I didn't listen to the interview, but there was a comment on Demonland about it that I'm pretty sure it was Chaplin who said that Spargo was our best kick inside 50. And given how critical that is, and it's something they've been working on, maybe that was something mentioned in the commentary, and I'm not convinced that's true. I think Sparks needs to get more of the footy. So I think that Laurie's at crossroads. I also think Chandler's at a crossroads, and as much as I love Sparks, I think he's at a bit of a crossroads too. I think those 3 players are essentially fighting for a spot. Seeing my feeling is Billings is ahead of I'd say is probably, with his skill set, Billings is ahead of both of those players at the moment.
And there's also McAdam to come in the not too distant future.
Yeah, but McAdam's not going to be competing. He's going to be more. I think McAdam will play Melksham's role of that. As much as Melksham hated it in the interview he did with him, Andy, he's not just a defensive forward. He was also a goal kicker, but that player that negates the opposition's best interceptor. And I was thinking about that today. Is that one of the, the end of last season, we lost JVR, we lost Petty come finals, JVR for the Blues game, Petty. I think Melksham, we lost a lot, losing him. And one of the things was that we didn't have that player who could negate the best intercepting player in the opposition. That was a big hole. So I think McAdam plays that role, and so he's not really competing. I don't see Laurie competing with McAdam for a position. Although you bring McAdam in, someone's got to come out of the team.
That's right. Yeah. There's an awful lot of players competing for that half forward, small forward type role.
Yeah.
Which is good in one sense, but unfortunately for Laurie, like you said, he was playing the majority of his time at Casey was in the midfield, and even in this game, he didn't get much of a crack at that.
And another thing, if you hypothetically accept that Billings comes into the side, and I'm not sure if this is fair on Billings, but if you accept that maybe he's not the high pressure defensive player that, say a Nibbler is or something, then, that means Laurie he can't afford to not be a high pressure player. And it was hard not to be impressed with Brown's pressure and energy and buzz around the footy. And so I think for Laurie to get a gig, he's got to, play to that sort of high pressure level as well.
Well, let's get into some more questions. So we have a couple of questions and comments about the 10 unanswered goals, the turnovers, the poor execution, and the fact that this was, after all, a practice match. So I'll read them out, and I'll get both of your thoughts on these issues and how much we should be worried about some of them, how much stock or weight we should put into the results of a practice match, and made yourselves clear on that. And are you worried that some of our deficiencies from previous years haven't been addressed based on what you saw in this match? So Bigfoot asks, practice match aside, what are your thoughts and feelings about conceding 10 unanswered goals in perfect condition? Should we be worried? Singer says, my question is for Big Man, and hopefully we can find the stats from this game, but they will probably be difficult to get. We seem to get murdered on the turnover today. It seemed that a lot of their scores were generated on the turnover. We, on the other hand, could not capitalise in our turnovers. Any insights would be greatly appreciated. Red Jacket says, welcome back, fellas. What did you make of our execution today? I thought our disposal was atrocious. Did you notice anything different with our transition of the ball out of defence and also with our delivery inside 50? Disco Stew 17 says, it was great to see the boys back in match sim with some opposition today. Looked like just a switch up from training with a few nice passages of play interspersed with guys trying to bite off too much and making errors. Best to do that at this time of year. Nice to see some of the uncapped players be given roles and for the most part show that they can be slotted into the side when required, probably just not 5 at a time. Nothing to worry about here, just business as usual for this year. DJR says, I watched the first 20 minutes of play in which we played fast attacking footy, hitting targets and using angles to target players who were in better positions. Then everything changed. I wonder whether Goody and co were satisfied with what they saw, felt that they had seen enough and did not want the footy world to see any more. After the first quarter, did you observe any discernible changes to the team makeup or game plan that might help explain Richmond's 10-goal run-on? Stu says, with our season spread over 25 games, 23 plus 2 buys, plus 2 additional on 2 weeks of practice games, the club has a long season to keep players fresh and uninjured. Big Man, does the approach to the weekend's game show an evolving strategy to our players' management from the club compared to previous years? There was some changes made last year following 2022 after a lot of players ended the year banged up and sore. This year's fixture presents more opportunities for extended rest and loading, and where 22 and 23 did not. The question is really a tee-up for Big Man to further soothe your MFCSS, Andy. You shouldn't let the results or performances trigger you too badly. Well, I am triggered. Practice match or not, I can't take a loss. I never can. There were enough worrying signs for me. 10 unanswered goals deflated me, despite our own 5 goals. It's 5 straight goals, I think, on either side. I think maybe it was on the other side of it. We kicked 5 out of 6 or 7. There were some positives from the match, but there were also some glaring negatives from the match, many of which I thought were issues from previous seasons that haven't been addressed yet. Our disposal remains as poor as ever. Our forward delivery and connection is still a big worry for me. Our ability to stem flow of goals reared its ugly head, but perhaps that was by design as a result of, we've mentioned it was a practice match. We continued playing attacking footy by use of the corridor, and our poor disposal forced the turnovers and we were caught out. But perhaps it was because we didn't go into, zone mode and defensive mode. We said, all right, no, we're just going to keep attacking, whereas in a game we probably would maybe go into a defensive mode after a couple of goals in a row. In addition, we do have injuries at this time of the year. It's out of our control, particularly amongst our key forward personnel, and that's a cause of concern on its own. And guys, I must say I lay awake in fear every night that if Max Gawn goes down, we are cactus. George, the 10 unanswered goals, you've said it's not a cause for concern.
No, it's not a cause for concern. I think Disco Stew summed it up as well. It's a step up from the training runs in this particular case. Most of the 10 unanswered goal all came from turnovers. Binman stats, about 70% of scores come from turnovers. People have got to get used to it. That's the way the game's played these days. And the reason that people score from turnovers is because the defence is not set. It's completely out of place. You're struggling to catch up, and footballers are so skilled these days compared to years gone by. They move the ball from one end of the ground very, very quickly. So, and we didn't institute any defensive mechanisms in the game to alleviate that. There was no tempo football that was being played when a team gets a run on like that. There was no zone defences. They were just allowed to run from their back line to their forward line almost unhindered, because it was just man on man basically for the whole period. I would be really, really concerned if Richmond took anything away from that, because all they did was chip the ball from one to the other, to the other, to the other, to get it down to the other end of the ground. If that's their game plan, they're going to get exposed really badly during the season. But if it's not, we didn't see anything too remarkable from them as well. So, stop the turnovers. You stop the opposition scoring is the simple motto that we can take away from this. 10 goals in a row, and then I think in that first 20 minutes or so, we saw enough in the game that we, for example, took Petrarca out in the second quarter, put him in the forward line because they wanted to try something else. Max only played half a game. We tried Varel in the ruck. We tried Shaki in the ruck instead. This was all about experimentation. We absolutely dominated that first 20 minutes. And I think that's the most telling thing that people can take away from that. When we had Viney and Max and Petrarca in the middle, we completely blew Richmond away. It was a team that finished top 4 versus a team that finished 13th, and you could see that in that first. After that, it was just a bit of hit and giggle.
I don't know if you can do these things on the fly, but after they sort of kicked 5 on the trot, would you not want to maybe practice a bit?
Why? I mean, that's like why. But the thing about why would you want to practice something that one would? Like if using mangling that analogy, I'm an elite golfer and I'm the best driver in the competition. When I'm out on the driving range, I'm not going to smash 50 drives down the middle. I want to work on my putting and my short game because they're my areas of weakness. What's the point? Melbourne can do that in our sleep stopping opposition. It's like. The thing about, this is going to be one of the things I'll repeat all season is, so play game style bingo, and is that there's two types of footy now, and one is the high pressure, big games and finals, which is all about manic pressure and crazy stoppages and high tackle numbers, and really a glorified form of rugby. And then there's the game that everyone wants to see, which is 10 unanswered goals, the ball pinging up and down the end of the ground. It's what do people want? They want that's what the AFL want to engineer, and you'll get I think increasingly you'll get that sort of game style in the season. So picking up Stu's point, I think that's a really good question, and I think he's on the money there. I suspect that I think that we're in a heavy training phase, and that was evident. So if you want to, our one wood is our all-team defence. Every team in the AFL has copied our all-team defence. We have got the best defence over the last 3 years, bar none. Statistically, we are the best defensive side, but that requires an enormous amount of all-team running to do that. And if you're coming into the game and you're fatigued, let's say that you have gone through a heavy training phase, or you just don't want to tire your players out at this point of the season, like Stu suggests. So I think it has been the last 2 seasons, we have struggled at the back end of the season physically. Every club has. Collingwood did too. You just see the games in the finals, they dropped away in quality a lot because all teams are struggling, particularly with that extra round, with the gather round. It is a brutal sport now. And so I think my gut feeling is that they have looked at maybe changing the loading and they're phasing a bit so that they're not so wound up at the beginning of the season. But if to stop your 10 unanswered goals, that means you've got to ask all your players to do the defensive running to get your zone set up. And I don't think that they were keen on doing so. And then the other thing I mentioned before, the key stats for the Melbourne game plan, probably the very heart of it, the number one thing is pressure. And so it's a bit, you can't really, if you're not prepared to, you mentioned the injuries, right? You mentioned that we've got some injury concerns. So the number one goal that they would have had, apart from, as George suggests, practicing a few new things, giving players a run in different position, was to come out of that game without any injuries, right? So if they dialed up the pressure to stop those unanswered goals, they would have increased the likelihood of injuries. It's completely counterintuitive. And in order to get back to what a Melbourne-style game plan is and defensively do the work, they have to do the all team defensive running, and they have to ramp up their pressure, which they did for the first 20 minutes, and it completely fell away. Then Richmond ramped up their pressure. We didn't go with them, and then they got on top of us. So, if we were to match Richmond, we could have in that period. We just, I used that analogy last year of rowing. We would have had to increase our rating, and we would have had to row harder. But I suspect they didn't want to row harder because for what? We get injured to what? As George says, exactly. They're a bottom 8 team. We're a top 4 team. Why do you don't drive your Ferrari against your beat up old VW? So it's like 10 unanswered goal. Who cares? Like, what does it? Depends what going in their metric was. Their metric wasn't to win the game of footy. If fans' metric was, well, anything bar a victory is, well, they're going to be disappointed with the result. So, I think that the main thing is that they didn't, as George suggests, they didn't bother to do anything. They could have even chipped it around and slowed the tempo of the game. But Melbourne has done lots of practice over the last 5-6 years under Goody of tempo footy and doing all of those things. We don't need to practice that. We need to practice our angle kicks inside 50 or our, handball chains. And that question about, the sort of anything different that we saw. The thing that was clearly evident is those big long handball chains. Lots and lots of handballs. Frustrating when they break down. That's why I was joking. If they do that in season, people will be yelling. They won't know what to yell. They'll yell, kick it, but don't kick it indiscriminately. Don't bomb it long. Just, oh no, they won't know what to yell. Their brains will explode. So that was the one clearly difference in terms of how we're transitioning. It was the use of handballs and to chain it up. Like there were some chains where it went 6-7, and that looked like a glorified training run. I wasn't concerned at all watching that we gave up, other than the fact it was frustrating.
All right, well, let's move on. D Minion says, Operation Keep Cozzy in the middle. Cozzy was electric in the middle, got a heap of clearances. I would love to see more of him in the middle in the season proper and not just at the first bounce of each quarter. Yes, we need him as a crumbing forward too, but until we can clone him, I want to see him build up his time in the guts. He adds a point of difference to the 3 or 4 bulls in track, Viney, Oliver and Sparrow. Sorry, big man, I would much prefer Cozzy over A and B. Nibbler should not be attending centre bounces. I'll get your thoughts in a minute, big man, on that. But George, your thoughts, we've touched on it a bit, so don't have to spend too much time. Thoughts on Cozzy in the middle? Do you think we'll see him play in the guts more minutes this season? Or will he just attend the standard first bounce of each quarter? Because I believe last year we saw him probably more at the beginning of the year in the middle, but then it sort of dialed back.
Yeah, look, we'd love to clone him. We need a Cozzy in the middle, and we need a Cozzy up forward. But we've only got one of him, which is great. But I think in this game they were trying to once again experiment to see how long he could last in the middle. Richmond didn't have their number one midfield available, but it's still a hard task in anyone's books. But what was impressive was how impressive he was when he was playing in there. You know, or was it 6 clearances he came out of there with? It was pretty beautiful to watch, if nothing else. And his kicking and his vision is something that's really there to behold. It's going to be interesting to see how much they play him in there, because we do need him up forward, and that's why I think there's a big opportunity for people like the McAdams and even for the Kynan Browns to fill that small forward role. Kynan Brown moves very well. McAdam moves pretty well. If those players are available to fill that small forward role that we traditionally want Cozzy to fill, then there's the opportunity to move him up to the midfield more. But it's a nice position to be in. Unfortunately, we're not going to have him in that first game.
I'm happy for Nibbler not to go into the midfield, and if Cozzy's the one going in, that's fine by me. But it's interesting because I often confuse midfielder with centre bounce tendencies. So George talked at the beginning of last season, because when he was trialled in the midfield, using Cozzy as like a shock trooper, comes in for centre bounce attendances and does the sort of thing that he did there. I didn't track him after that. Doesn't necessarily mean he then becomes a midfielder who tracks the ball up and down the ground. It's more than possible to use someone like a Coz in the way that Richmond used Bolton, where you can, or even Dusty, where he goes in just for centre bounce attendances, maybe 6 or 7, like that shock trooper, gets a 2 or 3 balls out the front, and gets some clean clearances out of the centre and sets up 2 or 3 goals from that. And then if he doesn't win the ball goes up, the opposition, then he tracks back to defense and hands off with someone. So he doesn't, he can go in as a centre bounce specialist almost, is what I'm getting at. And I'd love to see them do that. I thought they were going to do that, more of that last season. And I would certainly love it if they used him that way this season, because you get so few opportunities when you've got 6-6, you've got one-on-ones in your forward line, and that's what that 6-6-6 rule creates, the opportunity. If you win the ball out of the centre, particularly in your half, you're not kicking it from behind the defensive line, and it's gold, isn't it? So, and if you've got Cozzy kicking it inside 50, you're going to get 1-2 goals a game, and that's like, as Jay Rogan was noting before, suddenly your whole, it's a small margins. Suddenly you're getting 1, 2, 3 more goals from centre clearances a game, and Melbourne, no one's talking about our offensive issues then. So I'm hoping that's how they use him this year, and it was exhilarating to watch him to play that role on the weekend.
Yeah, I think we'll see more in the, like you said, in the centre bounces, not just at the first centre bounce of the quarter, but any time it goes into the middle, and then likely to move back down towards the forward, and someone else will take over the role for around the ground. Like to see him use that way. Smurf says, great to have footy and the Demonland podcast back. What did you guys think of our small forward brigade? With the exception of Pickett, I wasn't overly impressed, and I thought Chandler in particular was MIA. Almost every time the ball hit the deck inside our 50, it went out with very little effort. Would love to see the inside 50 tackle stats. Now, Big Man, I don't think we have those stats, definitely not for this game. In regards to tackles inside 50, what did you think of our defensive efforts inside our forward 50, as well as the performance of our small forwards?
Just that the first one first, it goes to my point about it being, and George's point about it being a practice game. It's like, if putting a sort of pressure on and tackling inside 50, if you want to avoid injuries, that's not a good start. So I wouldn't be too concerned about our, that being indicative of us having an issue in that area. But that said, I share Smurf's concern about Chandler. I think he's at really a crossroads this year. He's got to establish. If he doesn't establish himself best 22 this year, and he's going to have some players who are competing for his spot, not least of which Brown, who I thought Brown was by far the most effervescent, most sort of high pressure forward, and really showed up, Chandler. But again, if I'm right, and if they've gone through a heavy sort of training phase, then that takes the edge off a bit. So it's interesting because one of the other sort of discussions that we're having, around Nibbler's role and around Billings' role, sorry, not Nibbler's role, around Billings' role, was that, I think that was an area that we struggled in last year, notwithstanding Cozzy's sort of pressure was good. But, Collingwood had Hill and McCreery, even their talls who play, Elliott, who really apply. Johnson, who applied fantastic pressure and was, I think, a big factor in them winning the flag last year, because pressure inside 50 is critical. And the commentator kept on saying Cozzy was number one. I think he meant number one at Melbourne for tackles inside 50, because I'm pretty sure he wasn't number one in the AFL for tackles inside 50. But, particularly if he's going to be playing more middle, that does put a lot of pressure on those other players. It is really critical to trap the ball in there. And it's not just your smalls, it's your mediums. And, players like Elliott, so McAdam's going to have to put a lot of pressure on. Elliott's, quite tall. And Melksham, to his credit, really improved. George and I were quite critical of the pressure he applied in previous seasons, but his pressure last year was excellent. And so I think we missed that pressure in the final, certainly. So I think it is a right, Smurf's right to be concerned about Chandler, and I think I wouldn't be concerned at this match being it's sort of an indication we've got concerns in that area. But whoever they settle on in the forward line, and that includes the bigs, have to really apply pressure inside 50, have to get their tackle numbers up. I did a look at some numbers for JVR to sort of make the case that he's the best young forward in the AFL at the moment, and compared him to Amos and I think Ugelhagen and the King brothers, and he has twice as many tackles as those players, almost to a man. So I think it's an underrated part of his game, and if they do keep him out of the ruck a bit, and allow Shaki maybe to take a bit more of the grunt work in the ruck, you'll see even more of those tackles inside 50. So, but I do. I'm not sure about you, George, but Chandler, I think he just got to get more of the pill, and he does definitely have to put pressure on.
Yeah, it's certainly the case. He was, I wouldn't say missing in action. He was almost unseen in this game. He just didn't have the effect, and his position is certainly under pressure. I wouldn't be concerned about the overall pressure in this game, and tackles inside 50 as one of our contributors, Slarty Bartfast, noted. This was a game of bruise-free football.
I think that's the best, exactly.
That's across the whole ground. It wasn't just in the. So yeah, once again, don't take too much out of this, but for people like Chandler, you've got to start showing something to be able to keep your spot in the side now.
Yeah, and I think, Brown played like a player. He stood out because he was played like a player playing for a round one selection. And so he brought the energy. And then I thought similarly for the Tigers, a great name, Steely Green, which sounds like a Steely Dan dub cover band. I thought he had that sort of same energy, the same sort of mosquito in a bottle energy that Brown had. And, they stood out, those two players, because they were playing with energy and not bruise-free footy. But I think bruise-free footy was a good description of the game generally.
By the way, Cozzy Pickett was the number one tackler inside 50 in 2023 with 40.
In the AFL. Right,
in
there
the
you
AFL,
go.
Charlie Cameron 44, Dan Butler 43, Lockie Schultz 41, Toby Bedford and Jamie Elliott 40, around top five.
Well, I suspect there's a big. That's interesting. Elliott's up there really high. I suspect there's a big drop away in our team from Cozzy to our next tackle inside 50.
So he had 46. I'm going down, not finding another one. I'm at number 40. And Kay Chandler had 26 at equal 27. So, he's 20 less tackles inside 50. And Cozzy Pickett, how many games did he play? He missed a couple for suspension early in the year. He missed 3, didn't he?
Yeah, so basically that's telling really, because you need 2 players up there in the the 35-40 range. I mean, as I said, it's interesting. Elliott's right up there in the top 3 or 4, and he's not a small player; he's a medium. So that we're definitely in an area. I think Smith's right to point it out. It's definitely an area we've got to lift, and the KPI for those players will be that sort of numbers of tackles inside 50. I suspect.
So Chandler played 23 games. They both played 23 games, and Cozzy had 20 more tackles inside 50.
That's telling, given they're almost playing the identical position, aren't they? Small forward, close to goal.
Yeah. Okay, so Radelaide says, watch the game on KO, and I think our inability to win ground balls in our defence is still a massive issue. What do you think? Love the show. Bring on 2024. George, what do you say about ground balls in defence? Is it a problem? Is it a practice match?
Yeah, I don't know what to say to this one. Too many players out of position, not playing in their normal roles. With that, Bowie was particularly good in this game, but then Salem wasn't down playing in the first 4 quarters. McVie seemed to be playing a different role, and we had Howes down there. Tomlinson was sight unseen, and certainly spent a lot of time rolling around on the ground instead of doing anything useful. It didn't look great in this, and particularly with the way the game was being played. But once again, not particularly worried about it at this point. We've got the right sort of players, I think, in the half back line. Once the season proper comes on, but they weren't all there in this game.
Hard to get a read from this game for all the reasons we've talked about, but it does remain an issue, because it's like we talked about last season. It's really those medium forwards that in opposition medium forwards that give us the most problems, and ground ball gets is part of that mix. So a player like Elliott or Link McCarthy for the Lions, or we struggle to cover those players, in part I think because they win the ground ball, so defensively we've got to win more of them. But I actually think it's sort of the bigger problem we've got, and this is not going to get less of a problem, is players like Steve May and Tomo getting those ground balls. Like Maisie struggled to get down to a couple of ground balls. I know it's early on in the season, but he had that issue all last season, really, didn't he? With those sort of, it seems like lower back, getting down. That's not going to get any better. He's on the other side of 28 now, isn't he? So, that, and the other one is Tomo is like, whilst it's sort of ground ball, but his mobility, I forget, it was Bolter turned him inside out at one stage, and it was like Bolter's
and Kaczynski.
Yeah, or maybe it was Kaczynski, but it turned him inside out, and it's like, which either, if it was Bolter or Kaczynski, neither of them are particularly, I would say, super agile. And Tomo's 3 seasons past his knee injury now, so he's at peak fitness, and so his ground ball gets aren't going to be elite either. So it's a question mark.
Buck Naked says, welcome back, Demonland Podcast. The Handringers see the 10-goal run. Sunshiners see the first 5 goals in a row. Where do you sit on the Handringer Sunshiner scale? Well, you can guess where I sit. What did you like from what you saw? Did you recognise any new touches from the coaching changes undertaken in the off-season? Now, for all my doom and gloom, I was very impressed with Jack Viney. Practice match or not, 35 possessions is huge. As expected, Max was very good for his 2 quarters cameo. Billings impressed me. He's going to add some much needed class and will help our forward line connection. I liked Cozzy in the middle, and I'd like that to build for more than just cameos at the start of the quarter, as I mentioned before. I was impressed with both Windsor and Brown, and see both playing this season, hopefully early. Lever, Bowie, Rivers in defence was solid. Clary and Salem, they're a class above playing VFL, and both can't be too far off, and so that's a good sign. Guys, what did you like, and did you recognise any new touches from the coaching changes undertaken in the off-season? I assume that's a reference to McQualter taking over Uze's position as midfield coach, but I guess you can also comment on any changes in game style or plan. B-Man, let's start with you, and then George, you can jump in about what you liked.
Just a question. Do you either of you know whether McQualter before he took over from Hardwick was the Tigers midfield coach?
I don't know.
So
No.
he's now midfield coach, and Uze, was he our midfield coach? He had a bigger role than that, wasn't it? It wasn't just midfield, or was it just?
He started out as midfield coach.
Right. I found it really hard. I would say two things is that I think if anyone's expecting radical game plan change, they're going to be disappointed. The one that frustrates seemingly the most people on Demon Land is the long kick, the long bomb into inside 50. That will continue because, as we talked about at length last year, the analytics show, I'm sure, that the in some circumstances, for instance, kicking into a crowded forward line or when under pressure, it is the percentage play to kick long and high. Our first goal was the perfect example of that, the one that Track ended up getting. That was after a stoppage, after a kicking, I think it was Lever kicking long into a crowded forward line. The percentage play is to kick to a pack, get a stoppage and score from the stoppage. We definitely, the question about was there anything new, the obvious one is what I mentioned before, was the handball chain. So that was definitely new. And we, it's hard to take too much away from it, but there were some nice leading patterns, it seemed to me. There were a couple, trying to keep space in front of JVR, and he seemed to be playing deeper, more traditional full forward, which that's how I want him played, because, he reminds me a little bit of Dunstall when he's on the lead, with sort of out straight hands in front. Sometimes he can have a bit of wooden hands, I think, in those sort of one-on-one marking contests, but he looks great when he's running at the footy, like I guess most true forwards. But I think that's the role that, because when Brown's in the team, he plays that sort of role, but I'd love to see JVR take that up. And he seemed to be playing out of the square, running hard. It's all very well to say, well, we need to hit up targets better. If you don't have the players who can do that, then you turn it over that halfback flank and you get burnt the other way. But yesterday we weren't worrying about that, which was one of the reasons why we gave up 10 goals, is because we weren't worrying about that. But Billings hit a couple of nice kicks inside 50. Viney hit a couple of nice kicks inside 50. One of the kicks that maybe Brown, someone kicked over the top into Shaki into the pocket. I saw some of those. They were practicing that training when I went, those sort of kicks that were floating high kicks to the pocket, and allowing the player to run back with the flight of the ball into a pocket of space. So there was a bit of that. So I think hard to tell with the centre bounce stuff, particularly because Max wasn't off. It was off in the second half. The big one, I think, from McQualter was the people they were running through the midfield. And the big question mark is Salem. Will Salem be a mid? I mean, it's a chance. He didn't look out of, a bit hard to tell because it was VFL level, but he didn't look out of place. I'd be surprised if they do, but maybe that provides another role. We definitely need, we would really benefit from him kicking inside 50, and the best way maybe to do that is to get him into the midfield to give him that chance to do it. So there was nothing radical apart from the, obviously looking for those kicks inside 50, but the handball chains was the most obvious tactical or sort of game style different. That's really almost like 10 years ago that they were chaining up those handballs. That's what the Dogs were doing, and we undid it, because each time you do it, it's an opportunity for the chain to break and turn the footy over. But you guys have both been to a fair bit of training, I think. And have they been training that handball chain a bit at training?
Okay. The only thing that I noticed, and it was picked up by Kev Martin as well from a couple of weeks ago, was coming from the half-back line in particular, teaching. They were teaching people like Windsor and I can't remember who else it was, to stay wide, because you're playing a defender role when the ball's coming in, but then you're also playing an attacking role, so you've got to stay out. Lever was screaming at the young kids to stay out wide because you're the first option. When I get the ball and intercept, you have to be ready to go and be free to go, sort of thing. So that was the only change. Certainly didn't notice anything like that in this game. Like I said, there was very little defensive structures at all being played. But that's how you set up those handball changes, the quick movement from the half, intercept, quick movement from the half back line, move it up the field very, very quickly. That's really, in essence, not going to be a big change from what all the top teams play these days. That's the way it goes. And like you said, Binman, the fans had better get used to the fact that we're going to be kicking it into the forward line high when the opportunity arises. I get absolutely frustrated when I hear this term, lower your eyes. That assumes that there's no defence.
There's no one standing in front.
There's no one standing in front of you. There's usually 6 to 8 players standing in front of that. That's how football was played 30 years ago. It's not played like that anymore.
Well, you can. I think what McWalter will do, and that's what those handball chains is. The way to create space in your forward line is to move the ball quickly from the back half, so the defensive zone can't set up.
Yeah.
If you only get one go at that, that's the thing.
Yeah.
And so if you get it in there, then you don't hit your target. It comes back out. Now the D's set up the wall, but when they do, if they win the next ball back, they're kicking back into a crowded forward line, and then that next kick is the percentage play is a long high kick, because there is no space for a JVR to lead it into. The only way to create that space is to move it super quick off the halfback flank, and I suspect that's what McCalder and what those handball chains was all about, is trying to practice generating speed from the back half, getting it down quickly, and as I said, you get one go before the defensive gets set and everyone floods back, and you've got 30 odd players in in that forward 50 arc. If you don't hit a target or score on that one go, then it's back to setting up a wall and bombing it long into a crowded pack mark situation.
The other positive that people will take the wrong way is that I think we'll see JVR in particular produce a lot more this year. I
think that's so underrated what he'll get, the levels he'll go up.
And people will say, oh, we're now lowering our eyes and kicking it to him. No, it's because he's going to be a better player. He marks the ball at its highest point, and he is strong.
And he's a competitor. He's underrated what he's going to bring this year, I reckon.
Yeah. So we're going to see more of an output, and people say, "Oh, we should have been doing that 2 years." He wasn't strong enough 2 years ago.
He's a kid. He's 21, I think, in April. So this was the discussion I had on Demonland: is name a better player under 21, and it was a good discussion. Amos was put up there, Ugle-Hagan, but his numbers, Ugle-Hagan is a full year of AFL development, and he's a year older ahead of JVR, and JVR's average numbers on a par, or if not better than Ugle-Hagan, and his kicking disposal efficiency is 74% to Ugle-Hagan's 59%, for instance. He's a gun. He's an absolute gun, and I think that commentators and even Melbourne fans are guilty of underestimating where we will improve. And one of the areas we'll improve is JVR. He's going to go up 1 or 2 levels and be a force this year. He's still 2 or 3 years away from being the player he's going to be from his peak. He's a star, and I'm surprised more player, given his record, he's averaging touch over, goal and a half a game, and, maybe the one question mark is over his, marking. But I think that, partly that's a function of the terrible kicking that he has to put up with. And also the fact that we've asked a young kid to ruck, be the second ruck for a big chunk of last season.
Big-man, just going back to you asked that question about handballing at training, there's a couple of things they do. They do a lot of those, those keepings off, handballs just in tight quarters. That's one thing. But also some of the match sims that they do, not full ground things, they sort of would do, they might simulate a ball in from the half back line, and the first couple of possessions in all that was always sort of handball off quickly, sort of a chain of handballs as they go down the field. So you see a lot of that. They might do it a ball up on the wing, or a throw in from half back, or a kick out from a point, and sort of simulate a lot of, the next possessions are a couple of chains of handballs. So we did notice that a lot at training. So they definitely are training that as they go.
And it looked like that's what they were. They were trying to put that training into action in a simulation practice scratch match.
You have a little bit of opposition, but it's not.
Yeah.
You can't simulate totally a match thing unless you're going to have a just match.
And that's the thing that Collingwood really brought into the game, that I think that their tactical sort of innovation is that, their ability to get it outside from the contest out. Like that's what, to get it out to the Dacos, get it out to the side bottom. That's what they got really good at, and teams will be working on their variations on that. And handball is the obvious. You've got to almost handball out from that contest. You can't really kick out from those in tight contests.
Another thing I noticed at training that you would like, Big Man, is when they would simulate a ball in, they would have often uneven numbers at the contest. So, sometimes we'd have, 4 against 3 or 4 against 5, and then they'd swap around sort of who had the even numbers.
Which makes total sense, because, again, we bring one less to the stoppages. So they've got to practice that. They've got to practice having one man down at stoppages. That's one of our key strengths and key points of difference to other teams.
Just on McQualter, in 2016, he was appointed as the midfield coach. That's when he came in 2014, but then was 2016 became the midfield coach. And then the next article said that when he became interim, Kane Lambert took over the midfield role. So he was there for their entire premiership, the midfield coach for their entire premiership run. Dynasty, whatever.
He's been kissed, hasn't he? At Richmond, you finish up with Cochin and Martin in your midfield, and he comes to Melbourne, he's got Petrarca and Oliver and Viney.
But can I just clarify? So he was the midfield coach through Richmond's phenomenal run as arguably the best team of the modern era.
Well, from 2016 to 2023.
Well, I'm going to hang my hat on that one. I'm going to keep on coming. That's a definite reframing positive out of the weekend. That's filed away in my head for positives.
And then our premiership midfield coach, after 15 minutes, worked him out. So just kidding. Okay, next one. Logs asks, what's happened to Ed Langdon? Well, since our 2021 premiership year, and perhaps more accurately, I reckon, since Ed injured his ribs 10 weeks into our 2022 run of 10 wins in a row at the start of the year, I reckon he's been a shadow of the player that used to run up and down the wing all day. Played large chunks of this game right in front of me, and dare I say, looked disinterested at times. I was not impressed with his game at all this week, and I hope he can turn it around. George, any thoughts on Ed Langdon?
Yeah, should never have cut his hair for a start.
It's growing back.
It's growing back. The same thing with Ben Brown. Should never have cut his hair. Seriously, I agree with you. After that, when he injured his ribs in that North Melbourne game, he certainly wasn't the same for the rest of that season, because his strength is his running, and when you've got broken ribs, it's pretty hard to breathe. So he dropped off in that period. But I think the other thing that's happened is people have worked out Ed Langdon in a sense.
Worked out the way we play with Ed Langdon.
Yeah, you've got to shut down Ed Langdon, because if you don't, you will get cut to pieces. So he gets a lot more attention than what he ever did prior to 21 in particular.
And partly too, we've responded to that by bringing another hunter in, and so we don't just go down the one wing. Teams were letting us do that, so he's getting sort of percentage-wise less of the ball down his wing, I think.
That's exactly right. Yeah, it's almost been halved, the number of opportunities he gets, and but I'm still impressed with as a guy I go to the football with said, he's got an invisibility cloak. I don't know how he seems to get the ball and nobody seems to be around him for numerous times during the game. But yeah, he's a big positive. Again, nothing to take away from this game. He wasn't playing the normal Ed Langdon role where, if there was a run of 10 goals, Ed Langdon would be in the goal square picking up
doing that end-to-end running, and and similarly, that's another good. Like if you've got, my man Nibbler, he's a key part of that all-team defence because of the running he does. If he's in the midfield, well, you're taking him out of that high half-forward defensive running role. Same with, so you're limiting your ability to stop those. I'm a bit with you, Andy, is that, I mean, I don't know whether it's cause or effect or whether, but it does seem that he hasn't been the same player since he's had his ribs broken in that. It was his ribs, wasn't it? He got, maybe it's like it just because it's a coincidence or whatever, but it does seem to be he hasn't been certainly as sort of dominant as he was prior to
that. Mandy Lorian asked for our thoughts on Josh Shackey. It's just short and sweet. Look, with injuries to Harrison Petty, Ben Brown, Tom McDonald, Tom Fullerton, Jake Melksham, and Shane McAdam, I think we've got no choice but to play Josh Shackey. JVR absolutely needs support, and that's all I'm going to say on that. I'm trying to remain positive in the lead up to the start of the season, as you can tell by my brimming with positivity tonight. Big man, thoughts on
that. Yeah, it's a good attempt at being positive, Andy. You need, this is perfect season for you because it feels a bit different to previous seasons, and I think go back to Stu's comment about it'd be interesting maybe if we can get Selwyn on the show, you can interview him again, or we can interview him again because it'd be I'd be really curious to know if what have we changed this year with our preparation. We haven't got those stupid bloody 9-day breaks. We've got a full proper bye for the first time in 3 years, which you cannot underestimate the impact of that in the last 2 seasons, I reckon. So it feels to me where
this year, don't we? We got one early on as well.
Say again.
We've got 2 buys, don't we?
2 buys, yeah, and I think I'm meaning the main one in the middle of the season, but I think also in that other one we've got a good break between the games, so we have we've got from a conditioning point of view and ability to manage their loads, it's much better this year. I think it was really underestimated, the impact of that. He talked about that at the beginning of in the preseason last year, Andy, didn't he, about the challenges of the previous year and thinking forward what the challenges in 23 were going to be with being able to manage all of that. And they acknowledged that they got it wrong. But for instance, the trip back from Perth to for the gather round, coming back to Melbourne and going back to Adelaide, and they're not doing that this year. And we've got Adelaide and Adelaide, so they're going to stay in Adelaide that week, as I understand it.
Have they said anything about that? Has that been?
Or maybe I'm just assuming that's what they're going to do.
No,
I don't know.
We're playing Adelaide. We're playing Port.
We're playing Adelaide and then Port. So
I have to say, I think it's a mistake to.
Yeah. So, but getting that's why that relates to Shackey is that I think that we've got. In some ways, I like it. I like this more low key build up, and I like the fact you've got peanuts like Matty Lloyd, potting us, and people saying, we've been top 4 for the last 3 seasons. Nothing like this has happened in the whole time I've barracked for Melbourne. I'm much more used for people writing us off, and I'm quite happy that that seems to be the sort of common sentiment. And I think our injuries are overplayed a bit because they're all, most of those players that you mentioned have got their kilometres in the legs. That's the key thing, is that they don't lose too much time in their kilometres. So getting back to Shackey, I think this is his chance to, it's what you need a sort of a player like Shackey for. I'm well and truly open for him to surprising me. So, it would be a bit of surprise. I think I want to see him rucking so JVR doesn't have to. He didn't look a natural in the ruck, but you really just got to go in there for your 6, 7, 8, whatever it is, centre bounce attendances and take the hits that otherwise JVR would be taking to give Maxi a chop out. He's a beautiful set shot, and so the goal that he kicked, I think from Nibbler, nice kick inside 50 from my main man Nibbler to set Shackey up on an angle 40 metres out, never looked like missing. You probably had a good angle on that one, Andy. You were at the ground, weren't you, on that side? Were you on the... and so, he only has to take his chances. He's a big, as I said, when I was at training, I was surprised how big he is close up. So, I'm really open to him surprising me in the same way I was always with Weed. But what I would say, he's got more of he doesn't have that hesitation that Weed does in terms of it just feels like he's not a naturally competitive, physically competitive. He doesn't use his size and strength, and he's probably not going to. So, but he was what he was a top 5 draft pick, wasn't he? 2. So
Yeah.
he's got the skill, certainly got the foot skills. So I'm looking forward to see what he brings in the first part of the season. And as you said, Andy, he's got his chance to put his hand up and say, well, Tommy Mack or Benny Brown, whoever, you come past me. So I really, really, by all accounts, he's a terrific young fella. And I really hope he takes the opportunity and makes the position his own. And if he does, he'll solve a lot of problems, won't he?
Well, he will be playing as the backup ruck. It won't be JVR because Shaki has been training with the ruck. He's been playing as a forward, but every time the rucks do something, he goes with
okay.
To do
well, that's good. That's really good.
Unless it becomes Varel, then Fullerton.
Yeah.
Shaki has to show something. That's what it's all about. And even in this game, the only time that he got a mark or even looked competitive was when it was nailed lace out onto his chest.
George, he might be a player though that if you played him like a Hipwood, so don't think of him as a bustling JVR type. If you could get your players like Billings and Hunter and Salem and Windsor and those sorts of players getting speed on the ball off the halfback flank and allow him to run into space, he's the sort of player who will kick his goal from 40 metres out on the boundary when he's running into space.
No question about his kicking ability. It's about his commitment to getting the ball.
Yeah. And so if he's not used as if he's playing a ruck, that means JVR can be focused on being the ball down forward.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I don't think he can ruck, and he's got to show more at forward.
Yeah. Well, he's got I think he'll get his chance, won't he?
It's right there before him, so he has to show something, and I don't think he showed enough in this game.
I'm sending all my positive Shack attack energy to him.
And I think that's why Varel got a lot more ruck time.
Yeah. Well, possibly, yeah.
And look, I think he's got, as we said, he's got all the skill. I just don't think he has the mongrel in him. So we'll see. We're not going to obviously do a match preview of a practice match, but Nairobi Demon says, in the past 2 years, we've taken the first practice match seriously, fielding our best team for at least the first 4 quarters and used the second match to try new players. I was unable to watch Sunday's match, but from the post-game thread, it seems that we used this match to try new players in new positions, etc. Do you think we may have reversed our approach to this year's practice matches and we'll use the Carlton match to field a stronger team and really see where we're at? Well, I think we played all those new players out of necessity because we had sort of a longer injury list or a longer list of players who were unavailable. And we pretty much did field our strongest team that we had available against the Tigers. The players that didn't play in the ones is Angus Brayshaw, illness, Tom Harrison Petty, toe, Tom McDonald calf, Ben Brown knee, Charlie Spargo Achilles, Tajwa Woden concussion, Lockie Hunter calf, McAdam calf, Tom Fullerton hamstring. Now Oliver and Salem, the only best 23 players to play in the twos, were only in the twos due to their interrupted pre-seasons, and I would expect both of them to probably play at Carlton because I don't think there is a Casey match to be played this week. So George, followed by Big Man, what do you expect in terms of the type of team we might pick for the Carlton game? Go best available, rest a couple. I think they said Brayshaw, McDonald, Hunter and Spargo, as well as Clary and Salo might return. So there will be some changes out of the team that played the other day. Do you expect any stars to be rested for this game? What are your thoughts, George?
I don't know that we'll rest players per se, except that we might 3 quarters like we did in this game with Max. Halfway through, you pull him out and after you've seen enough. But I think we will play a proper practice game in against Carlton, and I think most clubs will be doing the same thing this year. The way that it's structured and the opportunities for pre-season games that the AFL has provided, like this game, have a look at all your young kids, like Richmond did. They had heaps and heaps of young kids. They didn't need to play Dusty or Nankervis. They know what they're going to get. I think you'll see in the other games in this coming weekend similar sorts of things. And then as you get to the proper practice or the game before the season starts, you'll see a more stable, established team that's put onto the park at least, and the changes will be made in the match, right, or as the match progresses. Once they've seen enough, like all practice, once they've seen enough on the field, they'll start to pull players off to rest them. Again, there's no point in breaking players at this point in the season.
My view is that Nairobi Demons spot on in the last 2 years. That's right. We've used the practice game as our sort of full-scale hit out. Let's get things ready. Let's go with our, if you look at the players who were selected in those corresponding games the last 2 seasons, that's been the round one team essentially. So I think he's right that this year will swap, and the game against Carlton at Icon Park, which I can't wait to go back there. I've been loving going to the AFLW games there. That's exactly what they'll do. That's going to be their serious hit out for the season. Just to sort of comment on for the preparation for the season, just to comment on that sort of practice game or whatever. It's interesting. I think the dynamic changes when it's telecast. 4 or 5 years, maybe even longer, 6 or 7 years ago, I went out to Cranbourne to see your corresponding practice game, at a game out there, and no one could have cared less about the result. There was none of this forensic sort of expectation that it was some indication of where the club would be, or it was out in the boondocks in a local footy ground. So I just. Yeah, again, I guess that's that theme of not putting too much into it. So I think I'm really looking forward to the Blues game. I think they will play it like, it won't be a practice match, or it'll be the practice match, or it'll be the simulation or whatever. It'll be the closest thing to our round one team, with all of practicing their systems and their structures and their setups and their defensive grid and all of that stuff. I cannot see Oliver being selected. I don't think. I hope that they don't bring Oliver into round 2 or 3. Is that make sure he's got the tank. There's no need to take the pressure off him. I doubt they will play him for the Carlton game. I hope they don't play him because he doesn't need pressure put on him. I wouldn't be surprised if they don't play Salo either. And the only question mark is, of course, there's no VFL game, but they'll probably organise a scratch match. So maybe Salo comes into it. Potentially. I'm not sure where Hunter at. George seems to suggest he's not ready. So maybe just Salem coming in. We haven't spoken about Oliver and about his performance, but it sounds silly, but I know it was against VFL, but in a way that sort of level, it almost reminded me how good he is. Like, he was so much better than the players around him that it sort of, again, it sounds a bit stupid, but I've not quite forgotten, but he's an amazingly good footballer. His ability to peripheral vision and understand what's around him is, I don't think I've seen anything like it in footy. Maybe Greg Williams was similar, not as quick but that ability to see 360 around him is just unbelievable. And he looks relatively fit. I don't know, he's probably still got lots of work to build on his tank, but he looks huge as well. Like, he's a big lad. It was curious. There was a discussion about whether he might play forward on Demon Land, and that might be something that you could put him at high half forward. And if you could add goals to his game, he almost becomes the complete player. So, but they didn't trial that at all. One of the things that was most notable about his performance was he poleaxed himself. Were you still at the ground?
Yeah,
taking it, going for a mark. Yeah.
Well, yeah, or going for a spoil or something, and smashed himself. And I was, oh my God, he's done his shoulder. That's how it looked. And what was interesting is that they brought him back on. They didn't put him on ice. They ran him out. He obviously probably wanted, and he looked like he was playing. He would have been a pretty ferocious sight for some of those young VFL players coming out in the opposition. So it was just fantastic. It was so good to see him running around, and I hope they don't rush him back. But when he runs out on the MCG, we've got Oliver, Track, and Viney rucking in the first centre bounce to Max. That's going to be quite something.
Do you think he'll play round 1 or opening round?
don't think so. I hope not. I'm not. I just think that it takes the pressure off him to say, to even manage it, to say, look, we're aiming for round 2 or 3, and anything before that's a bonus, because I don't think, it's useful for him to have pressure on him now. We don't need to, I think ease him into the season. But if he's ready, sure. But the thing is that if you ask him, he'll say, yes, I'm ready. So, it really, that's where someone talking to Selwyn Griffith would be so great, because, he looked a cut above VFL level, but he's probably got some serious amount of work to do aerobically, because he's missed a chunk of the preseason, and there's no cutting corners with the sort of work needing to do to get your tank up.
Do you know, for the Carlton game, have they got an extended bench?
It's a good question. I don't think so. I think it's like game full, normal game. Maybe they have a 6. But no, I think if it follows last year, it's the sort of replica AFL game.
It's match condition, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. I was just asking because that'd be the opportunity to have a few extra players like the Browns and the Windsors having a good look at them once again, or giving the opportunity in a more serious next step up. But
well, they will have, of course, has there been a change to the sub rule this year? So they'll have the sub. They can use someone like an Oliver as a sub, or Salem as a sub, if that's what they're thinking. I have a vague memory last year is that Melbourne or one of the teams asked the AFL for a special dispensation to have but I might be imagining that.
AFL has confirmed pre-season match. All 18 clubs will participate in the AFL Community Series match to be played between the 27th of Feb and 3rd of March at venues across Australia. 4 quarters of 20 minutes plus time on, as per AFL Premiership season. Squad of 30 players, 8 interchange and 4 emergencies. Minimum 4 players on the interchange bench during the match at any time. No interchange cap. Full panel of AFL appointed umpires.
Yeah, well, there you go.
It is.
George, yeah. Well, then in which case, maybe you do have Oliver in your. Well, yeah. I don't think they will. But then, with 30, geez, maybe I'd get a game.
Let's not get too excited.
30 players to play.
They should raffle off one of those positions. Just sit on the bench.
Yeah. That may well be very, very useful for us in terms of the whole season if we've got an extended bench. When if people like Salem and Oliver and maybe a Hunter and maybe even a Fullerton, maybe even a Ben Brown, can get 10 minutes or 15 minutes of play, that gives us more option as we go into round 0. Because there's still, another week and a half after that.
Yeah, it's a Wednesday, tomorrow week. We play. So that's Wednesday, February 28th, and I've just had a look at the weather. We like to look at the weather. It's a 6:40 game.
I can't wait.
28 degrees that day. So at 6:40, it's telling me it's still 25 degrees. 7. So it's still by 8:30. It's still 23 degrees. So it's going to be a warmish night.
Maybe we should do a live broadcast.
Yeah, I don't think so. You're going to hear me during a game.
Yeah, I wouldn't be holding the weather bureau till it's 7 days out, but
kick the bloody thing. That's all.
Don't bomb it, but kick it.
Yeah.
Don't handball it.
All right, boys. We did manage 2 hours for a 4-hour game for a practice match. So well done.
We've got to lift our game.
We really do. Thank you. We'll get into the thank yous. We'll be back after our next practice game. I'll work out what day we do it. Check out demonland.com after the game, and then you'll know when the show's going to air. We'll also be doing a more comprehensive season preview of our 2024 season just prior to the opening round. We've also got to have a discussion of what format that will take, probably similar to the last year. Thank you and welcome back to my co-hosts, George and B-Man. I couldn't do this show without you. And as always, your questions and comments are an integral part of the show. So thank you to Lefty, Kev Martin, Bigfoot singer, D Minion, Red Jacket, Smurf, Clintosaurus, What Say What, Wells 11, Jabroni, D Alt Fart, Disco Stew 17, Radelaide, Buck Naked, DJ R, 58er, Logs, Monocular, Nairobi Demons, Stu, and Mandy Lorian. Thank you to you, our loyal listeners. Don't forget to leave us a 5-star review and a comment on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcast from, and we'll read it out on the next week's show. Go Demons.
Go Red Leggers.